So you want to build built-in bookcases, but you're not sure how to do it, you're looking for ideas. Well, today we're going to show you how we built ours, how we planned it out, and how we pulled it all together, and hopefully it gives some ideas to you to inspire you to build your own. Stick with us. So this is the space we have to work with. The first thing we did was model the area so we could test out some different things like rounded headers versus straight, shelf placement, other things like that. And the good thing with the final design that we came up with here is that we can build it in two parts. So we're going to start with the lower part and get that together and then move on to building the bookshelves themselves. The first thing to do is to build a support piece for the bottom. And what I did was I made mine slightly higher than my baseboards, so I wouldn't have to do any special cuts around those baseboards. Really, it's very similar to what you would do if you're putting in cabinets. It's just a simple frame. It's going to sit on the floor, and once I put it in, I can shim it to level it up. It ended up being quite level, but as you can see, there's a slight sag in the floor in the middle, so I just cut some spacers and fit them underneath to take up that space. Now that I have this in and level, once I build the cabinets, I can just set them on top of this and know that they are level. With the support base in place, I went on to build a cut list and lay out my plywood cuts so that I could cut the majority of my cabinet pieces in one go. This helped by reducing the amount of times I had to measure my cuts, and I could use things like blocks and set the fence on my table saw to make sure the pieces I cut, while they may not be exactly the correct measurements, they will at least all be consistent with each other, which is one of the main things you need when you're trying to build cabinets. I rabbited the ends of all the side pieces to give it extra strength and to limit the amount of exposed plywood end grain. One of the benefits of modeling the cabinet beforehand is that I know there's only going to be one exposed surface on all of these, so I can simply use screws to put this together with the exception of one end where I drilled some pocket holes so the screw heads are kept hidden. And I have one good finished end for the end of the cabinet. Now the fun part, assembling the cabinet, making sure everything is nice and square, and getting it ready to go in. Building the middle support piece was one of the trickier cuts where I actually did have to measure it to make sure that it fit within the assembled cabinet. Plus I had to notch out the board where my cross pieces went through. I just used the scroll saw for this, but you can do it any number of ways. I also ran the middle supports through the router to break the edges so I don't have any knuckle busters right in the middle of the cabinet when reaching in there. At this point, I also cut my shelves so I could use those to align the middle piece in position when trying to put everything together. Then it was just lining it up, gluing and screwing everything into place. I was going to get fancy and use dado cuts for the shelves, but ultimately decided to just put rails on the sides that the shelves could sit on top of. They're inside the cabinet. It was much easier. Plus, this way the shelves are easily removable if I don't need or want them in one of the sections. Now I can place the cabinets on the base, and since I leveled the base beforehand, just setting these on top, I know they're level. Supervisor Kitty seems happy with it, but of course I double check it anyway, and I do find that they're true, but I did run into the first issue of the build where if you see along the wall here, the wall corner is not 90 degrees, so there's a space out at the front of the cabinet. It's not such a big deal with the bottom cabinets because there's going to be a door there and it, frankly, will be helpful to have the space. But I'll have to be cognizant of it when I go to the bookcase section on top. One more thing before I go too much further with the build is that I want to move this electrical outlet from here to up here above where the main part of the shelf is. This should help with things that need to be plugged in once we have everything complete. Please make sure you check your building codes in your area, and of course, if you're not comfortable with doing your own electrical work, make sure to hire someone who knows what they're doing. It is not worth the risk. Next up are the doors, and for them, we decided to go with full overlay or European style. This way, we don't need to worry about putting a frame on the front of the cabinets either. To cut these, I simply used pine boards and used blocks to make sure I cut the various lengths to the correct size and that they were all even. To calculate the width of the doors, I took the whole width of the two cabinets together, subtracted 3/8 of an inch, and divided by 4. This will leave 1/8 of an inch between each of the doors, and then the two doors on the side will sit flush with the ends of the cabinet. For the height, I just used the height of the cabinet base minus 1/8 of an inch, so there'll be a small gap between the doors and the cabinet top. For the inside panels, I just used 1/8 inch hardboard, so I cut grooves in the pine frame pieces so they would fit snugly, and then cut tenons to match the horizontal pieces. Once I had the depths of those grooves, I could then calculate the size of the panels and cut them out, leaving a slight space for the expansion and contraction of the doors. With those cut to size, it was simply a matter of assembling the frame, dry fit first of course, and then gluing and clamping everything into place. Before putting the top on the cabinets, I filled the edges of the plywood on the cabinets. Since this is going to be European style with overlay doors, the edges of these pieces of plywood will be exposed. They will be covered by the doors, but I still want to clean them up a bit so it looks more finished when the doors are open. To make the top, I wanted to use MDF, but I also wanted something thicker than just 3/4 inch, so I laminated 2 pieces together to give a more solid surface. Doing this gave me a nice, thick, solid top for these cabinets. I just laminated them together using glue and then screwed from the bottom, and then cut the edges to the final size to make sure they were nice, smooth, and even along the edges. After that, I chose the best 2 edges to leave on the outer side and ran the router along the edge just to break the corner a bit. Note that if you do your top this way, it is really heavy and can be hard to move. To compensate for that corner that isn't 90 degrees, I cut the inner end on an angle to match the wall to try and at least get it to fit a little bit better and not have too much of a gap to fill with caulking, and in the end it turned out pretty well. And like the cabinets below, I filled in the edges of the MDF top with wood filler as well so I can sand it smooth and make it look like one solid piece. Then of course, I took everything apart and sanded it all down, then sanded some more, and then sanded some more. After all the sanding came the fun part where I got to put it all together and clamp it, screw it down, and get it all into place, including driving some screws into the wall studs, which I marked off when doing the electrical work so I already knew where they had to go. Then I drove on a good covering of primer to cover it all up. With everything primed, it was now time to put the hinges on the doors and get them installed. The hinges I decided to use were full overlay, soft close hinges I found on Amazon. I'll put a link to those down below. I don't have a drill press, so I just use a cheap drill guide with my hand drill and a Forstner bit for the doors themselves. For figuring out where to put the holes in the cabinets, it was worth it to take the time to make a small cardboard template. That way I can mark the cabinets exactly where the hinge mounts needed to go with little effort, and I know that they're accurate. Now that the doors are on, and with a little bit of caulking around the edges by the walls, the bottom section of the bookcase is pretty much complete. We made the mistake of putting some stuff back on top of it, and it stayed in this state for an embarrassingly long period of time before I finally got around to actually building the bookshelves to go on top. With the hiatus over, we go back to the model to plan on how to build the top section. We're going to have to build the left and right bookshelves, of course. Then I'm going to have to put trim on because these do have exposed plywood edges, and we want to cover them up. Plus, adding a face to the actual shelves will give them some extra strength. We are putting books on these after all. We're going to add a straight header, which is what we decided to go with. Then I have to re-add the crown molding back once the bookshelves are complete. We're also going to have to do some electrical work sprinkled in amongst all this, as we want to add pot lights, plus change the location of the existing light on the wall to place it in the center. The first thing for me to do is cut out this short piece of crown molding, as it is the easiest piece to measure out accurately. Then I'll set that aside and start building the actual bookshelves. To make these, I made sure that all of my boards were the same width, and then, as with the cabinet, I used blocks to make sure that I cut all of the shelves and then all of the vertical pieces to the same length. I built a jig so I could dado in some grooves using my handheld router, taking care to ensure that they were all at matching height across the 4 vertical pieces. With the pieces all pre-cut, I glued, clamped, nailed everything together for the 2 bookshelves. Put those in to dry fit them, so we have an idea where the light in the middle is going to go. There's the record player that's going to go in the middle, and also so I could mark where I have to cut the crown molding up here. And in here, we figured out where this light is going to go, somewhere about there. So I can do the wiring before I put everything in as well. At the top, I just have a tacked on. That's as low as the header's going to go. Now that I have that crown molding marked, I can cut out the long piece and also remove the corner piece. And this seemed like a perfect time to bring in the cleaning crew before moving on to the next step. Before putting the bookshelves in position, I cut a small notch in the bottom, inside corner of each of them. This is to allow running wires in behind without having to drill holes afterwards, since we're planning to put the record player in the middle section. I couldn't find matching crown molding in store and I needed another corner piece to make what I had work. So I had to improvise by cutting the pattern out on a 3/4 inch board and then using the scroll saw to cut them out, gluing them together in a stack, and then mitering them to build my own corner piece, or at least one that looks sort of close to the other one. At this point, I'm going to add both of the corner pieces in, as it'll be easier to do it now than to put them in afterwards, especially on the original one because it has tabs on it that need to go in behind the crown molding. Time to get the electrical work done. I cut the hole for the new light centered between the two bookshelves. I pulled power for the original light up to the top for the pot lights and then ran a new wire down from there to the new hole for the new light. This allows me to use the pot light as a junction box to get power for the light on the wall. I can then install the new light in place even though the power is not connected yet. For the pot lights, I cut a thin piece of plywood that will mount to the top of each of the bookshelves. I cut a hole in the center near the front using the template that came with the pot lights and then simply nailed the board into place once I had the hole cut in it. Then it was just a matter of putting the bookshelves back up into position, securing the right one in place. I'll secure the left one once I start the trim, and then connecting up the pot lights and popping them in place. Of course, I test them to make sure everything's working before I go any further, and so far so good. Next up is to cut all the pieces of trim for the facings of the bookshelves. I cut the verticals on 45 degrees to have a hidden corner, but really I probably could have just laminated a couple of pieces instead, given that I wasn't staining the bookcase. That would have been a lot easier. Oh well. I'm also going to use trim to cover up another problem that I found, and that is, as you can see here, the corner is not 90 degrees by the cabinet top, but as you move up the wall towards the ceiling, it comes in back closer to that 90 degrees that it should be. So that means the left bookshelf is going to get a custom piece of trim that's tapered down and cut on a slight angle so that I can mount it as flush to the wall as possible and cover up the fact that the corner isn't a true 90 degrees. Now I can go ahead and secure the left bookshelf into place and put on the rest of the trim for the facing. For the trim on the sides here, you can see if I look up here, there's a gap between the wall, and this because the wall was curved, it wasn't flat. And so what I'm going to do is I'll put this piece of trim on, and then when I measure my cross pieces, I'll make it so this trim will go flush against the wall, and it'll actually cover that gap so we don't have any light coming through there. So just working around the imperfections in the wall to make it look finished. It's time for the header, and there's nothing fancy here really at all. I just cut the pieces and glued and nailed them up into place with straight cuts. And once the header's up, there's no measuring for the crown molding. I don't have any extra space to spare anyway, but I just hold them up into place, mark the bottom where I need to make the cut, and then set my miter saw accordingly and hope that I can squeeze enough out of the pieces that I took off the wall to begin with. And I managed to get just enough out of the crown molding that I had to finish it. So now all I need to do is patch all the holes I made and clean things up. And of course, anytime you do some sanding, make a mess, you gotta bring in the cleaning crew again. I need to close off the space up above the light. I wasn't really sure what I was gonna do here, but I decided to just put a straight piece in with some support on the top so it doesn't sag over time, and just keep it simple and block it off. Now onto the finishing work, adding some caulking to help clean everything up and make it look good.
One coat of primer paint on there. I caulked on the inside here, but I didn't do inside the shelves here. We thought we'd try it out first with the primer to see if we needed it, but I think it would look better if I did it. So that's the next thing. Put that caulking in there, do another coat of primer, and then we're ready for paint. Okay, this is with the coat, the second coat of primer on, and I did caulk in the inside the shelves, and it does look a lot better. I have a few spots yet to touch up, but if you're wondering, this is the primer that we use. This bullseye stuff, we've had good luck with it before. We're not really happy with the way it covered or didn't cover some of the grain, but for the most part, it looks pretty good. We'll see how the final coat of paint, or the first coat of paint does on this, to see if we need to do something else before we do the whole thing. So we're going to do a test area next and then paint up after that.
And of course, Suzanne comes in to do the painting because that's the deal. I build the stuff, she paints and stains it.
What paint do you use?
Fusion mineral paint, and this is casement, which is the second whitest white. The reason we're using it, it is intended for painting furniture. There's other paint that you can use, of course, but we've had good experience and results with using this paint. And it's really nice to paint with. It goes on easy. It's supposed to be self-leveling, but you could use other alternatives, but we like this. I like this one. Jason doesn't do the painting, of course.
And it's cheap, right?
It actually, no, it's not, but I think it might be cheaper than if we'd bought like a brand name furniture cabinet paint, because it actually goes quite a long way. I'll be able to better tell you when I finish.
So 2 coats of primer, 2 coats of paint, and we've let it sit now for a week to let the paint cure. We ended up using 2 of these. There's a little bit left in this. That was enough to cover it, and on the bottom as well. We didn't do inside the cupboards. We were going to do them with a different paint because we don't need the fancy paint in there. But looking good all around. And now we just got to put everything back on it and add handles to the doors, which we don't have yet, but we are going to order soon. So what are you doing here?
Trying to make the rainbow, like what's it called? The home edit? I don't know. What is it? The Young Years, Best Love Stories and Poems for Little Children. So let's see. Oh my God. No wonder people are... The husband who was to mind the house. Wonder what happens to him.
Oh.
That looks like blood. Oh. What?
What's going on there?
I don't know. Hold on. Let's see how it ends. Uh-oh. He's hanging by his foot.
I was pretty skeptical about organizing the books by color, but we went with it and it actually turned out pretty well. We don't have that many books. It's not that hard to find the book you want, even though they're not sorted by author or by title, which is totally the way that I would have done it if I had done it on my own. But this does look good. And the last thing we needed to do is add on handles for the doors. We decided to go with edge pull handles as we really didn't want them to stand out. These just went over the top of the doors and were screwed into place. Pretty simple, they look good, and they're easy to use.
So there you have it. That's how we built our bookcase. It really made a difference in this room. We're really happy with it. Hopefully it inspires you and you build your own projects. If you build something, let us know down in the comments down below. Our next project is to refinish this old record player, get that going, and that'll really finish off this whole thing. But if you found this helpful, hit like, hit subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.